like to read a couple of verses from Matthew chapter 20 before I begin. Matthew 20, verse 17. And Jesus, going up to Jerusalem, took the 12 disciples apart in the way and said unto them, now he's with more than just the 12, so he pulled them aside and said this to them. Behold, we go up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be betrayed unto the chief priests and unto the scribes, and they shall condemn him to death, and shall deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge and to crucify. And the third day he shall rise again. The title of today's message is, Why Did They Crucify Him? The Romans. Why did they do it? What were they thinking? Previously, I discussed the religious leaders and what went through their thoughts, what was their motivation. But why the Romans? Jesus Christ didn't, or it's at least not recorded, that Jesus Christ didn't interact much with the Roman soldiers, the occupying force. But the very first reference to an interaction between Christ and a Roman centurion is in Matthew chapter 8. I'd like to read it. Chapter 8, verse 5. And when Jesus was entered into Capernaum, there came unto him a centurion, beseeching him and saying, Lord, my servant lies at home sick of the palsy, grievously tormented. And Jesus said unto him, I'll come and heal him. The centurion answered and said, Lord, I'm not worthy that you should come under my roof. Just speak the words only, and my servant will be healed. I'm a man under authority. I have soldiers under me, and I say to this guy, go, and he goes. And to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard it, he marveled and said to them that followed, truthfully I say unto you, I have not found such great faith, no, not in Israel. And I say unto you that many shall come from the east and the west and shall sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. First reference that Jesus Christ would not just deliver Israel, but would be for the whole world, salvation and access to God. But the children of the kingdom shall be cast out into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Not all Israel would enter into heaven. And Jesus said unto the centurion, go your way, as you have believed, so shall it be done unto you. And his servant was healed in the same hour. Now we've all heard of the woman that came to Jesus Christ and asked for his help, and he said, you're a Gentile, and I've been sent to the house of Israel. And she responded and said, well, isn't it all right? Even the dogs eat from the crumbs that fall from the table. He didn't immediately say, I'm going to help you, like he did to the centurion. Why? Well, that's explained in Luke. Luke chapter 7. Verse 2 through 10. And a certain centurion's servant, who was dear unto him, was sick and ready to die. And when he heard about Jesus, he sent unto him the elders of the Jews, religious leaders in his community under him, beseeching him that he would come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they asked him, saying that this man was worthy for whom he should do this. He loves our nation, and he has built us a synagogue. Have you ever read this before? Have you ever thought about a Roman centurion, a soldier in the occupation, loving the nation that he was ruling over and building out of his own pocket the expense of a synagogue for them? He loves our nation and has built us a synagogue. Then Jesus went with them. And when he was now not far from the house, the centurion said, Lord, don't trouble yourself. And we read this part in Matthew. Jesus Christ said, and we read it earlier, that there would be deliverance for all people. Yes, his mission, his goal, his accomplishment was centered on delivering spiritually Israel. Remember Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, one of the ones that thought that he would someday rise up and overthrow the Romans? I'm not going to take the time to read all those verses. There's not enough time today to get into it all. But that's not why Jesus came. He came to open the door for those to enter into the kingdom of God, not to take out military occupation so that Israel could rise up and be militarily and governmentally free. His kingdom was not of this earth. That wasn't his goal. But yet people often set expectations for deliverance so low that they forget about God. This man loved the Jewish people, paid for their synagogue, and Jesus responded by healing the servant that he loved. So what kind of a relationship do you think Jesus Christ had with the Romans? He obviously didn't hate them because they were occupying. And what do you think happened when that centurion then went and told all his men above and below him, his comrades in the military? Do you think the rumor spread? Do you think the word spread? I'm sure it did. This is the first reference to Christ's interaction with the Romans. In Matthew 17, it talks about how it began for the plan to have the Romans kill Jesus Christ. In chapter 17, verse 22, he said, while he abode in Galilee, the Son of Man shall be betrayed into the hands of men, and they shall kill him. And the third day he shall be raised again. And everyone that heard it was exceedingly sorry. And when they were come to Capernaum, same place where that centurion was, they that received tribute money came to Peter. And they said, doesn't your master pay the tribute? Peter said, yes. And when he went back to the house, Jesus stopped him and said, Simon, what are you thinking? To whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Do they take the tribute money from their own children, or they take it from strangers, the people they rule over? And Peter said, well, of the strangers. And Jesus said unto him, so the children are free. But lest we offend them, go to the sea, cast out a hook, Catch a fish, the first one that comes up, and when you open his mouth, you'll find a piece of money, take it and give it to them. They tried to trap Jesus Christ and his disciples by asking about tribute money. Because in previous teachings and things that Jesus Christ had said, he had already taught them to respect God, that God was their master, that God was their Lord, not men on earth. And so they raised the question of, well, how does he pay the tribute? Is he submitting to the government, to the authorities? But Jesus Christ had Peter go get that fish and get a coin and give it to them so that they would not be offended. He didn't say that they needed to pay that tribute. He said the children are free. The strangers, those who are not of the kingdom, are the ones who should be exacted that tribute upon. That tribute was spent by the Herodians, those under King Herod, a Hebrew, a Jew, who collaborated with the Romans in ruling over the Hebrew people during the occupation. That's who got that money. Jesus Christ didn't provoke the Romans or those religious leaders that worked with them by refusing to give the money. He gave it. He got it out of a fish's mouth. Well, that's not the first and only time it happened again. Matthew chapter 27. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. Matthew chapter 22, where we want to go next. Chapter 22, verse 15. The Pharisees took counsel how they might entangle Jesus Christ in his speech, and they sent out unto him their disciples with the Herodians. So now you have the disciples of the Pharisees with the men of Herod who work with the Romans. So there is some interaction here with people tied to the Roman government, and they want to entangle him in his talk. And they set out unto him their disciples with the Herodians, saying, Master, we know that you are true, and you teach the way of God in truth, and you don't care about any man's authority. You don't have any regard for the personage of men. So tell us, what do you think? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, Why are you tempting me, you hypocrites? Show me the tribute money. And they showed him a penny. And he said unto them, Well, whose image and subscription is on this? And they said, Caesar's. He said, Well then, give Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give unto God what belongs unto God. And when they heard these words, they marveled, and they left, and they went their way. There's a little bit more of that in Luke chapter 20, verse 20. It says in the Gospel of Luke, they watched him, and they sent forth spies, which feigned themselves to be just men, so that they might take hold of him in his word, so that they might deliver him unto the power and authority of the governor. And then it goes on to talk about the same interaction. The purpose for asking that question wasn't because they really wanted the answer. They wanted to trip him up in his words so that they could accuse him and bring him before the government authorities. They were seeking something so that they could accuse him and either have him arrested and hopefully receive a death penalty. These were the religious leaders. I bring it up, even though I discussed it last week, but I bring it up because now they're colluding with those who are colluding with the Roman authorities. There's very little mentioned in the Bible, in the Gospels, about the interaction between Christ and the Romans. We read the one with the centurion, and now we're talking about the Romans who are working with the religious authorities of Judea. But they're doing this so that they can bring him before the governor, Pilate. That's in chapter 27 of Matthew. And now it gets interesting, in case you weren't already. In Matthew 27, verses 1 and 2, it says, "When the morning was come, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death." This is after the night in the Garden of Gethsemane, after the mock trial that they had for him. They're now bringing him to the Roman authorities. "And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor." Verse 11. "Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, 'Are you king of the Jews?' And Jesus said, 'You said it.' And when he was accused of the chief priests and the elders, he didn't respond. And Pilate said, 'Don't you hear all these accusations against you? All the witnesses they bring up against you?' And he never opened his mouth. Pilate marveled. It says, marveled greatly. He was astounded. Here this man is being accused by all of these people, and he says nothing. No defense. And so at that time, it was the feast of the Passover coming, and the governor it was an annual thing where they would release a prisoner, give someone amnesty and let him go. And when they were gathered together, Pilate asked, "Well, who do you want me to release? Barabbas or this guy Jesus that you call the Christ?" For he knew that for envy they had delivered him. And when he was set down to judgment, Pilate's wife said, "Don't have anything to do with this guy. I had a dream about this. You really should back off. Don't do this." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the multitude that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. You know those people waving the palms? People out in the crowd? They persuaded a large enough number of them to stand outside the palace and yell for Barabbas instead of Jesus. The governor answered and said, "Who should I release?" And they said, "Barabbas." And he said, "Well, what should I do with this guy you call Christ?" And they said, "Let him be crucified." And the governor said, "Why? What evil has he done?" And they cried out, "Let him be crucified." When he saw that he couldn't prevail against them, but it just got into more of a tumult, more of an upset, more of a riotous situation, he took water and he washed his hands. And he said, "I think that he's an innocent man. The blood of this man will be upon you." And they answered, "Yes, his blood on us and on our children." And they released Barabbas, and they scourged Jesus and delivered him to be crucified. And it goes on to talk about all the abuse that Jesus Christ endured prior to suffering on the cross. Jesus Christ did get mistreated by those Roman soldiers and the soldiers of the Herodians in the temple. But there's more details than just what's recorded in Matthew. In Luke, and we don't have time to read through all of chapter 23, But I do want to point some things out. They brought him to Pilate, and they said, "We find this man perverting the nation, forbidding to give tribute to Caesar." Now, we read those verses. Did Jesus Christ forbid people of giving the tribute? No, these are false accusations. And he's saying that he himself is Christ, a king. He didn't say that either. In fact, Jesus Christ, if you read through your Gospels, kept telling people, "You recognize who I am, but don't tell anybody. Don't say that." Then said Pilate to the chief priests and to the people, "I don't find any fault in this man." And they got more fierce in their saying, and they stirred up the people. And saying he stirred up the people, teaching them from Galilee all the way up to this place. And when Pilate heard that he was a Galilean, he thought, "Oh, great. I can wash my hands of this like my wife wanted. I'm sending him to Herod because he's the king there." And he sends him to Herod. Herod's all excited. Herod, remember the guy that killed John the Baptist? Wondering, because of all the miracles Jesus Christ was doing, was this John the Baptist raised from the dead? He wants to meet this guy. He sent me Jesus. And it says, hoping to see him perform some miracle. He was looking for a show. And he questioned him with many words, and Jesus Christ didn't respond. And the chief priests and the scribes stood, and they vehemently accused him. He's getting more agitated. And so Herod and his men, they mocked him, and they arrayed him in a fancy robe, and they sent him back to Pilate. And Pilate responds to them again and says, "You brought me this man. You say he perverts the people. I've examined him. I don't find any fault in this man. I can't find any proof of the accusations you have against him." Pilate really wanted to let him go. What's the relationship between Christ and the Romans? There's no friction there. Herod didn't even want to do it. I sent him, and he found nothing worthy of death in this man. So we'll just beat him up a little bit, and we'll let him go. And all the people yelled, "No, away with him, release Barabbas." Barabbas, who was involved in a sedition, an insurrection against the Romans, and for murder, and had been cast into prison. That's what he had done. And he asked again, "Well, what do you want me to do? I'll release Jesus." They said, "No, kill him, crucify him." For the third time, he said to the people, "What did he do? Why? Why do you want me to do this?" So he finally gave in. And he let Barabbas go. And he set Jesus Christ into the hands of the Romans to be crucified. But you know what? There's more to be told in the Gospel of John. In John chapter 18, verse 29, and it goes all the way through to chapter 19 to verse 16, and I won't read the whole thing, but you should. And they brought him in to Pilate. They put a crown of thorns on his head. They had the purple robe, so at this point he's back from Herod. And the chief priest said, "Crucify him." And Pilate says, I can't find any fault in this man. And the Jews answered and said, "We have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God." When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he was afraid. Pilate's thoughts changed at that moment. he went to speak to Jesus Christ about it and said, "Where did you come from?" And Jesus didn't answer him. And he said, "Don't you know I have the power to crucify you or not?" And Jesus answered and said, "You have no power at all against me. No power at all except to be given you from above." And so Pilate went back out to the people again and one more time tried to release Jesus. And they wouldn't hear anything of it. And they yelled out, "If you let this man go, you're not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king is speaking against Caesar." And that's when Pilate finally gave in and sent Jesus to be crucified. So let me sum this up for you. Why'd they crucify him? Why did the Romans do it? How did the religious leaders get the Romans to crucify Jesus Christ? You see, they'd already arrested Barabbas. He was arrested for rebellion, for murder. The Gospel of John refers to Barabbas as a robber. A robber is someone who takes something by force. The Greek word is lestai. It's where we get our word molester from. Someone who physically abuses to take something from someone. That's who Barabbas was. But now Pilate is being presented with a man who's rising in popularity, told that he was a threat, but he hadn't done anything to provoke Roman authority. Pilate recognized it was simply a conflict of political ego amongst the local religious leaders in the community. It was not aimed at Roman authority. And yet they persisted. His wife cautioned him because of a dream. But Pilate really didn't get nervous or upset or disturbed until he heard that Christ was said to be the Son of a God. Romans and Greeks believed in gods having earthly sons. We've heard of Hercules and others, right? Put your thoughts in the mindset of Pilate. Killing the son of a god would have consequences, both on earth and spiritually. He didn't want anything to do with that. You know, revenge from the gods would be something he would not want to have to deal with. So he gave him a choice: Barabbas or Jesus. Now, we've all heard the name Barabbas. We all have names. But names used to be given with great significance. Names mean something. Bar Abbas. Bar in Hebrew, son. We've all heard the verse where we refer to God as Abba, Father, our dear daddy, an affectionate term for your father. Barabbas, daddy's son. Or Jesus, Son of God. That's the choice they were given. He offered Barabbas, an insurrectionist against the Roman rule, just to appease the people and avoid angering God. He could even explain to the Roman authorities above him, if they got upset, that it's an annual thing we do. We let somebody go, it appeases the people. It's a public relations event. But the religious authorities implied that if he didn't kill Jesus, and let him go, that his loyalty to Caesar would be questionable. For a Roman, that was a death penalty offense. So, he gave in. And Jesus Christ was crucified by a government for not bowing down in submission. He taught allegiance and obedience to a higher power, to the Lord of Lords and to a King of Kings. Why did they crucify him? To instill fear, to intimidate others into submission, to squelch a potential rebellious uprising, to ensure that it didn't get and gain momentum. They crucified him. You see, just like the religious leaders, the Romans had also followed the example of Satan. They allowed pride and power to rule in their hearts and minds, and they ruled over the people, judged them, and enjoyed it. What was going through their minds? How did they get manipulated? The devil's really good at it. He pits one bad choice against another bad choice. And you try to worm your way out by picking whatever is the most convenient way to get out of it. And at that point, he washed his hands and said, "It's on you." We're going to end with a song